Britain called them primitive trinkets. Today, one sells for $4.8 million at Christie's auction house in London, where men in tailored suits bid with the calm confidence of people who have never once questioned their right to own what they are holding. The room is climate-controlled. The lighting is perfect. The bronze plaque on the block, cast sometime in the 16th century by Edo master craftsmen in the Kingdom of Benin, sits behind protective glass like a relic from a civilization that no longer exists. Except it does exist. It exists in Benin City, Nigeria, where the descendants of the men who made that plaque are watching the auction on a phone screen with inconsistent internet, knowing that their inheritance is being sold, again, to the highest bidder, and that the country that stole it has never paid a single dollar in reparations. Britain called these objects primitive. The market has now decided they are priceless. That contradiction is not accidental. It is the architecture of empire, and it was built deliberately, brick by deliberate brick, beginning in January of 1897. To understand what was lost in Benin City, you must first understand what Benin City actually was. Not the colonial caricature. Not the anthropological footnote. The real thing. The Kingdom of Benin, known to its people as Al-Ibanu and to Portuguese traders as the Great Benin, was one of the most sophisticated and enduring political entities in human history. It had been a functioning, expanding, diplomatically active kingdom since at least the 11th century. By the 15th century, when Europe was still navigating the chaos of feudal fragmentation, the Oba of Benin, the divine king, was presiding over a capital city with wide, paved boulevards, a network of massive earthen walls that a British officer would later describe as larger in scale than the Great Wall of China, and a royal court that received foreign ambassadors with a protocol so structured and precise that Portuguese envoys sent back letters to Lisbon expressing genuine awe. Benin City's urban walls, known as the Aya, stretched for over 16,000 kilometers of earthworks in total, a construction achievement that predates many of Europe's most celebrated medieval fortifications. The city itself sat at the center of a web of trade routes connecting the forest kingdoms of West Africa to the Atlantic coast, and by the 16th century, the Oba was exporting pepper, ivory, palm cloth, and enslaved captives of war to Portuguese merchants at a volume that made Benin one of the wealthiest trading partners on the West African coast. This was not a village. This was a metropolis. And at its center, in the royal palace, hung the bronzes. The bronzes, technically brass alloy castings made through a lost wax process so technically demanding that European metallurgists studied them in disbelief when they first arrived on the continent, were the kingdom's living memory. Cast by skilled craftsmen called the Eigen Eramwan, who had been practicing this art since at least the 13th century and who worked under direct royal commission, these plaques and sculptures were not decorative objects in any casual sense. They were a photorealistic archive. They depicted obas and warriors and Portuguese traders and ceremonial rituals with a facial precision so exact, so geometrically faithful to the individual human face, that when British museum researchers ran early 3D scanning technology over several pieces in the 1990s and 2000s, they found that the spatial architecture of the facial structures could not be fully replicated by the software available at the time. These craftsmen, working without photography, without digital tools, without anything that the Western art world would recognize as a modern technology, had produced portrait sculpture that rivals, and in some cases surpasses, anything created in Renaissance Europe. There were approximately 3,000 of these objects in the palace by the late 19th century. In February of 1897, nearly all of them were gone. The man most directly responsible for what happened was Admiral Harry Rawson, who commanded the British punitive expedition of 1897, a force of approximately 1,200 officers and men, equipped with the newest Maxim machine guns and 7-pounder artillery pieces, dispatched from the Niger Coast Protectorate under orders from the British Foreign Office. The stated pretext for the expedition was the killing of a British trade mission led by Acting Consul General James Phillips in January of 1897, when Phillips and a party of approximately 250 men, most of them African carriers, were intercepted and attacked while attempting to enter Benin City without the Oba's permission during a sacred festival period during which visitors were traditionally prohibited. Phillips had been warned. He had been told explicitly by local informants and by his own staff that the timing was dangerous and politically provocative. He went anyway, because he believed that Oba Ovanrawan had been obstructing British trade access to the interior for too long, and because the Foreign Office in London had already decided that Benin's independence was economically inconvenient. The attack on Phillips was used as justification for a military expedition that had, in effect, already been planned. Rossian's force entered Benin City on February 18, 1897. The Oba had already fled. The palace was looted over several days. Officers and enlisted men alike filled their personal baggage with bronze plaques, ivory sculptures, ceremonial objects, choral regalia, and wooden carvings. Some objects were destroyed when the city was set on fire. Most were taken. The official British government inventory, which was never comprehensive, recorded the removal of over 2,500 discrete objects. Scholars now estimate the true number at closer to 3,000 to 4,000 pieces. The economic dimensions of what Britain seized in February 1897 are almost impossible to overstate when placed against their true historical value. At the time of the expedition, a single large bronze plaque might have been valued by a British Army officer at a few shillings, curios, trinkets, the junk of a defeated savage court. The British Museum acquired hundreds of pieces at essentially no cost, receiving them as donations from officers who had taken them as personal war trophies. The Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford received 327 objects. The Ethnological Museum in Berlin purchased a significant collection. By 1900, Benin Bronzes had been distributed across at least 30 major European and American institutions. The total acquisition cost to these institutions, across all purchases and donations, was likely under £10,000 in 1900 currency, approximately £1.2 million in today's money. The current assessed market value of the entire corpus of Benin Bronzes held in Western institutions is estimated at between $500 million and $700 million. Individual pieces have sold at auction for between $1.5 million and $4.8 million in the last 15 years alone. The British Museum currently holds approximately 900 Benin objects, the largest single collection in the world, and has, on multiple occasions, refused formal repatriation requests from the Nigerian government, citing the 1963 British Museum Act, which legally prohibits the institution from deaccessioning objects in its permanent collection. Germany's Humboldt Forum returned 22 pieces to Nigeria in 2022. The British Museum has not returned a single one. To place this in context, the entire annual budget of Nigeria's National Commission for Museums and Monuments, the government body responsible for preserving the country's cultural heritage, is approximately $2.5 million. The British Museum's annual operating budget is approximately £170 million. Britain holds the inheritance. Britain also holds the budget to keep holding it. What has been most aggressively suppressed in the standard telling of